-7.
Tomorrow night. Yeah, it's not, I mean, we would consider that to be very cold, but not.
But just then they'd be like,
About what?
Good evening and welcome to the City Council Conference of Tuesday, February 11th, 2025. One item on the agenda, discussion and presentation of the Griffin Master Plan. Marty, are you presenting today?
I am.
Would you please?
Well, let me just make sure that I know how to advance the slides. Yep, I do. That works. Well, thanks for having us here tonight. We have been working on Griffin for a month or so. Or more, maybe about a month. We had a kind of quick review a couple of weeks ago, actually, with council members, and have perfected some things. A lot of what you'll see tonight are some of those things, but also some refinements and further developments. So there are essentially four things that we want to cover with you tonight. One are just some analysis of the site itself, of the opportunities and limitations and constraints on it. Secondly, the building blocks, that is streets and development modules and those kinds of things. Third, four concepts that are related to each other programmatically, but somewhat different in terms of what's incorporated in those sites, along with reviewing some of the new ideas or developing ideas that got introduced in each one of those. And then finally, some thoughts about implementation, about what to do and in what order. So this is by no means the end of the process. Think of this as a still an in-progress presentation. So when we look at a site like this, we look at limitations and constraints and opportunities and things that we want to preserve, and so some of those are pretty obvious, like Francis Cate Park, which is an important neighborhood open space, maybe not used to the degree that it could be, but an important resource. Site issues like drainage are quite important. We've got two creeks, and we know that there's a lot of water that tends to accumulate in the southwest corner of the site. Our colleagues at Garber have done an analysis of some of the drainage patterns on the site, and we're happy to report that we are, except for one scheme when I didn't know what I was talking about, we're consistent with that. Historic preservation is a component. So maintaining the chapel, maintaining as much of Hope Hall as possible and reusing that, and maintaining the traditional administrative building are all factors that we want to work around. In addition to that, the central kitchen is a really kind of an important resource, and so there's some ideas for how that could be used. The landform. So in the middle, we have this sort of moderate crater that we're not quite sure why it's there. You can see that I don't know if this is. You can see it. This is a sunken area. It is a sunken area. We don't know why, but it's. We don't think it's a prehistoric meteor crater, but there it is. So those are all things to think about and work around. There were some basic assumptions as we looked at this site as well, and hopefully they're on target. But we're looking at this primarily as a destination and a residential environment for the most part. We want it to be a significant place that draws people to it. That it can become a bridge between the east and the west parts of town. It wants to have that kind of role in terms of its location. We're projecting, in terms of thinking about what goes on the site, of accommodating about 5 to 8% of the housing demand that's generated and calculated in the comprehensive plan. So that gets us somewhere in the range of 16, 17, 1,800 housing units on this site. We want it to be a great neighborhood experience for people who live there. We wanted to provide affordable housing for a variety of income groups. It needs to be part of its surrounding neighborhoods. It can become part of a surrounding of a greenway made up of the Sutton Wilderness Preserve, Griffin Park, and also the drainage way along Bishop Creek to the south. It should respect and interpret the history of the place. It should manage stormwater effectively. It should complement downtown and relate to downtown. And last but not least, and we know that this has been a lot of the conversation, it should be a center for artistic expression. So the concept of the chapel as an arts center, we think, is a very powerful one, and should be respected. When we look at a piece of land like this, we also establish some basic building blocks. So in the various sketches that you'll see, we used a couple of building blocks, a basic street section that's diagrammed on the left here. That's a 25-foot wide residential street with 5-foot sidewalks on both sides, an 8-foot sidewalk setback, or tree lawn, as we sometimes refer to those as, about 4.5 feet back from the sidewalk for easements and so forth back to the property line. So it's a pretty generous streetscape in terms of being green and de-emphasizing the amount of pavement that's there. We also established a basic module for a block. And that basic module incorporates 40 by 70 foot building sites. So we're talking about generally very small lot, high density development, but a framework that you can do a lot of things in. It is a greenway based development. So some of the units, all the lots are served by alleys. All the garages would be to the rear. Some of the lots face a street, others face a greenway. And so a couple of examples on the left are projects, one of which is in a small town in Iowa, Grinnell, which is, I guess from Iowa standards, not that small a town, but our small lot, single family houses along a greenway. The other is in Des Moines, is a project that we did the master plan for called Grace Station.
Marty, seeing a plan like this is similar to one that I've seen used in New Orleans. And
Yeah.
they had problems with access in there. Are the alleys, I know you got a 20-foot alley in there and that's a spacious alley, but with trash cans, with other things that seem to end up out there, is that large enough to stop?
Yeah, it is, and you'll see in some of the schemes that there's specific places for that.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, so that's kind of the next. So what can you do? What can you do in a 40 by 70 foot area? Well, you can do, and you can see how those are set back from the alley. You can do a single family detached house. So this is an example from a project that we conceptualized and then a developer built it in Excelsior Springs, Missouri, that are small lot single family houses with rear loaded garages and then the building footprint on a very similar lot size. You can do semi-attached single family. So this is a project in Omaha that's an owner-occupied project exactly based on this kind of a module, where the garages are to the side of the main unit, and the semi-attachment is with the garages. You can do duplexes, or you can do townhomes. So in all those or row homes. So there's a lot of flexibility within this kind of a module, and whether it's 70 or 80 or 90 feet is Wheeler, for example. Just, but we think a 70-foot module is probably a good one to use for planning purposes. We don't know if it'll actually get built this way, but as a site layout and as a standard, it could be useful.
Yes, sir.
Would, in those two examples on the left, would those be on our left there? Street parking allowed in front of those?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
A big fan of cars buffering the people
Yeah.
walking from the streets. So
Yeah, yeah, and the other thing is that if some of the parking needs to be completely off-street, the 8-foot tree lawn could have insets for parking.
So, and that one of the things that caught my attention just now is the 25-foot street width, so 12.5-foot lanes. And so some concern if there's not street parking that big wide lanes would encourage speeding
Yeah.
through the neighborhoods
Yeah.
as we see
Yeah.
all over Norman.
Yeah, and generally, I mean, so an interesting model is that my residential street, as an example, and the standard in Omaha is actually 25 feet or 25 feet. And in my neighborhood, which is an urban neighborhood, there's enough on-street parking that it counts traffic, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes a fight with fire departments, but,
Well, sure.
yeah.
But yeah, if there's no obstruction and it's a big
The
wide
wider they
street,
get, the faster the cars move,
people
yeah.
drive fast and then they want speed humps or slow down the fire trucks, so.
Yeah. Yeah, generally, and a fire marshal would disagree with this, the risk of a kid getting hit by a speeding car is worse than the risk of fire.
Yeah.
I say this as somebody who has kids who live in Los Angeles, by the way, but,
Yeah.
yeah, but, okay, so those are kind of basic principles. 4 different schemes. Scheme number 1 we call the green belt, and since the pointer won't work on this, the idea here was that there would be people who were here a couple of weeks ago saw this scheme, a continuous green belt that would wrap around through the top of the house and to the top of the site, then come back down through the middle. These are the typical block sizes. The church and Hope Hall are in an elliptical form. There's a traffic circle, big traffic circle around the depression there, primarily there for ornamental purposes, and a Main Street setting that connects those two features together. In addition to the town center, there's an interesting possibility on the southeast corner of the site that we've used in a couple of the schemes, and that's a production studio. We know that there's an idea for that floating around the city. I happen to have a daughter who is a television writer in Hollywood and an Emmy-winning television writer. And so I called her and said, "Is this totally nuts?" As an idea, she said, "Absolutely not. That production companies are looking for settings like Norman that are outside of Los Angeles, and it's a completely realistic thing." She said a couple of things. One is that it would be very good if it were close to neighborhoods and neighborhood services. So a lot of these studios in Hollywood, in Los Angeles, are actually in residential neighborhoods, even though they're very big in scale. The other thing is that if there are historic buildings around it, don't tear them down, or keep, because they use those for sets, and it saves a lot of money to be able to do that. So in other words, it's not a nutty idea. So this one is based on the Sunset Brosnan studio in Hollywood on Sunset Boulevard, which is kind of a medium-sized studio. We have another smaller version that we'll show you in the next in the next scheme. This scheme has some things wrong with it, including too many Texas Donut buildings, which are those things on the top. But it generates 1,785 units, assuming that each one of those 40 by 70 yellow boxes is a single unit. So if they were townhomes, they would be tighter than that. It's nice to be able to mix and match, though, so it doesn't have to be identical structures on each of those blocks. The things that are introduced in this concept are the Texas Donut, and Richard McKeon asked me, have you ever seen a situation where the lower level of one of these was used for townhomes and the upper level for standard apartments? And I said, yeah, actually, when we did the Court of Shore Master Plan for Oklahoma City, we showed that, exactly that concept. So there it is on the left. So it is possible. The Central Historical Ellipse, the studio, an pedestrian overpass over Robinson is some to connect this site and trails with the Griffin Park to the north. And then the residential module, basically what we're using is something very similar to this. So scheme number 2, one of the things that I don't like about it is that in this scheme, we didn't know that we thought the administrative building was a different administration building than the one that is important to people. I don't think that the Main Street axis is developed very well, the connection to downtown. So the next scheme got a little bit better than that. And so here, there's a, we are proposing in this scheme a water feature on a pretty large one, by the way. So this runs all the way from Main Street to Rich Street. So it's a couple of blocks long, long enough to matter. This is the Edsel Ford house. We don't know if it actually had anything to do with Edsel Ford, but it's a mall that very much like the original concept, the original plan that we had up on the title slide, extends and then straightens out where the church is. In this case, we're thinking about continuing or suggested continuing a water feature, a canal that would extend from the pond up to a town square in the center. There would be mixed use buildings, some bigger apartment buildings. So this is a disassembled Texas Donut. More conventional apartment development along Robinson. In this scheme, this would actually be inverted so that the buildings were on the street, and then developed a playground, basically a kid's space in what we call the Sunks, which is something that again exists in my neighborhood. So you see that sort of arrangement. This scheme generates about 1,670 units, and the features that are introduced here are a mixed-use project called, this is based on the steps in Culver City, California, downtown mixed-use project in this town. That's just an incredibly successful small project. So these are seating steps that would be on axis with the church. And then these are 2 mixed-use buildings. A smaller studio, this studio is actually based on the Jim Henson studio in Hollywood. That my daughter loves. She says she's going to give me a tour of it because she's got a relationship with them. Another feature is using the central kitchen as the kitchen for a restaurant that would be related to the mall. So this site does a much better job of linking to downtown. does, I think, is very much focused on making the historic buildings work effectively with the rest of the composition. Has a town square, which can be a very effective development tool, and then does a much quieter residential neighborhood behind that. The things that are introduced that are new on this project are some of the things that we used in concept one are still here, but the steps is really I mean, this is just the coolest project I've ever, for a small mixed-use project that I've ever seen, and it's just very intensively used. And the use of the linear waterway as a connecting tool. So this is a project that we actually did in Pella, Iowa, called the Molengracht, and it's pretty cool,
Very
actually.
collegiate looking,
What?
very collegiate looking.
Yeah, what's Dutch is
Oh,
the
interesting.
yeah. So the concept of it was to recreate a Dutch canal on a half-block redevelopment site. So Pella is very Dutch, very Dutch front, Dutch this, Dutch that. The hotel is called the Amsterdam Hotel that was done as part of this project. So yeah, I mean, it's really, it's, we don't know that Dutch motif is right for Norman, but it's pretty nice. Also, the idea of the sunks, this space, which would be a full square block, the fact that it's a little bit below grade can be very good in terms of a space that kids can play in and feel kind of private, but also can be supervised from above. So the sunks in my neighborhood, which is what this is based on, it's actually a drainage way or drainage swale in of a boulevard. In winter has we have a bank, a neighborhood bank that pays for a little ice rink. In the summer, they do a wiffle ball ballpark, and there are kids playing in it. And then for adventurous 4-year-olds like my granddaughter here, it's just a place to sort of wander around and control, you know. So the small studio, so that's the Henson studio on the right. You get an idea of the scale of the studio. At the top, the use of a city square as a development tool to develop mixed-use buildings around. Concept 3 is a refinement of that does a couple of things that the early one didn't. The first that concept 2 didn't do. One is built, shrunk the canal a little bit, built preserved the main traditional administration building, did more rather than structured parking, surface parking, and 3-story walk-ups. So this has fewer of the donut elements to it. Many of the other elements of this are the same, but we redesigned the corner because the creek actually comes out of an inlet there. Did a couple of larger buildings and then some commercial at the corner of Robinson and 12th, and then something like an interpretive pavilion at that corner that would be essentially a gateway to the project that could tell the story of how the Griffin site developed, which is actually very, very interesting. So the new elements here include the preservation of the old administration building. Once we realized or were told that the building that we thought was administration wasn't administration, it was, but it wasn't the original one. So that whole sequence is really quite important. Focus much more on walk-up units and on a smaller studio. So that one generates about 1,840 housing units. And then more recently, concept 4, which is a refinement of the first concept, but actually quite different. When we were making the presentations a few weeks ago, there was some discussion about using the more curvilinear pattern that was in the first concept. I sort of played with that idea. So you can see now the square is not there as such. There is kind of a main open space, but there is a main street setting that connects these two focuses. We widened the ellipse out and changed it somewhat so that the church, the steps building, the Hope Hall, which be converted to housing and maybe even artist housing, and another building, all kind of fit together into a composition. We have a pier that goes out into the pond around the Edsel Ford House. Many of the other elements are the same, but it's another pattern to think about. So here we've changed the street pattern. After a visit to Wheeler, thought that the commercial street was actually kind of a nice idea, although the different ways to do it. And then finally, there's a project that instead of the studio, although that's still not a bad idea, this one is exploring the idea of a project that's an enterprise or maker district kind of project with flex buildings and commercial that's patterned after one in Oklahoma City on 164th and Portland that was called to our attention. It's kind of an interesting project as well. So lots of pieces that can be combined and mixed and matched and so forth. And so finally we began to think a little bit about implementation. Part of our concept, or part of the whole reason for this enterprise, is to keep this from being split apart into small pieces and to keep it as a unified site that can be comprehensively developed. So that is important, and whether it gets built this way or not, having that kind of cohesive development where the pieces make sense with each other is really important. This will be a community enterprise. It will be a public-private partnership that involves a lot of community support. Probably the city will wind up being the at least the pass-through owner of the land. There'll need to be a master developer, which might very well be a nonprofit development entity, like a development corporation that's capitalized and formed by community leaders and neighborhood and various participants in community interests. That a master plan, this one maybe with modifications, would be developed with development guidelines. So, for example, if you know the project that developed at Stapleton Airport in Denver, it operated that way. There was a private developer, was the master developer, but put together a very detailed set of design standards, and the various housing uses were built to those standards. That's important because it's very possible that different pieces will get parceled out to different private developers, and the design standards will provide some cohesion. That will have to establish priorities and catalytic projects. You don't build 1,800 units at once. It's going to happen over 10 years, and so where do you start? There needs to be a good financial foundation, obviously, and finally, just a way of parceling out pieces of the project to individual private developers. So we'll get into more detail on that as we move through it, but some things to think about as we move toward actually finishing the deal and making something work.
One thing, isn't the northeast corner of Robinson and 12th East, isn't that an enterprise zone? Or is that down one section?
I think the whole thing is.
Thing was,
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Whole thing? There's an enterprise zone in there.
Opportunity zone.
Yeah, it just,
We'll take a peek right now.
oh, there she goes. It, and that could change where you put the studio, where you put other
Yeah.
things, because there's ways. To me, I've always envisioned that section of land in there is ringed by commercial. And then putting it in there, so you've got places to eat for them, you've got places to shop for them, all the rest of that. I've got nothing, I don't mean to critique your
Yeah.
thing, I think there's some beautiful ideas.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that was the approach that ULI took in 2018. And I'll tell you the thing that kind of pushed me in a little bit different direction. The commercial's a little bit more interior. Is an experience that we've had in Overland Park, Kansas, in the Kansas City metro area, where the suburb of Lenexa built a new city center. And so the city bought 66 acres of land for a downtown district, which it did not have. So Lenexa has about 60,000 people, and it's kind of an interesting place because it was one of those situations that was largely residential and strip commercial, and wanted to build a downtown, so the city went ahead and did it. They retained a developer who's a very high quality developer in the Kansas City area. And the developer's original master plan called for 400,000 square feet of commercial. It's right on Interstate 435, and they wound up with 60,000 square feet. That it's very hard to develop. It's just very hard to develop that much commercial in today's market, and so that led us to say, we're going to be better off to have some commercial opportunities that are incorporated into residential around the edges, but to have a little bit more of a city center or town center feel in the interior, but not to have too much commercial in it.
So even the concept of, it was those ULI drawings that kind of set my mind as to, I think I know what this will look like. It doesn't look like anything that I thought it was gonna look like, thank goodness. But the concept of providing that commercial opportunity to the people that live there, do they wanna get to 12th and make their way down a busy 12th? Or would they rather just walk down the neighborhood street
That's
to
the
get
idea.
to that dining opportunity or shopping opportunity? And boy, I'm glad you drew pictures. 'Cause
That's the idea. Yeah, and when you think that there'll be like 5,000, eventually at full build out, about 5,000 people living here, it's like a small town.
And I would like to point out, as one of the residents in the neighborhoods around there, having the connectivity, that would be attractive to us, because then we can walk downtown,
Right.
or we can walk just a few blocks to the east.
Yeah, I mean, similar to that point, if you look at Wheeler District in Oklahoma City, you have people that drive to the district to participate in all the things going on, but no one ever walks down Shields Boulevard. So you've just got, I think you create it internal to the district. I think that's a great concept right there. I mean, are we giving feedback on the designs right now? Or is that-
I'm just musing more than anything. It just, as I see it, I think it's a beautiful idea, and there's some pretty big impediments in there called asbestos and ACM and all the rest of the other kinds of things that it'll be interesting to figure out how we solve those
Yes,
problems.
yeah.
And getting that right. I think it would be magnificent to keep as many of those buildings as we could and make it as historically accurate as we could, and make it into another center.
Yeah, I agree.
It takes me time, being an introvert, it takes me time to take all those pictures and put them in there and change an imagination.
I just want to give opinion on just a couple things. Scheme number 2, would you bring that one back up? I think that's the strongest one. And what I really love about it, the regional detention, because obviously in this area of town, stormwater is a huge problem. So anywhere you can park a big old detention pond like that and make it an amenity or a feature, I think that's good work. And then that Main Street access, just connecting that vista from downtown all the way through the site, connecting it to the chapel, making that a pedestrian thoroughfare. I think that's really strong. I love the rear loaded corridors with the alleys, no garages in the front. I like the Texas Donuts. Not a big fan of surface parking, but some more garages. And then I really like the corner element that you had up there on 12th and Robinson. Yeah, so if you could incorporate that into that scheme.
Yeah, 3 is a refinement of 2, and with
Yeah,
so
that-
3 is the
yeah.
same. 3 is the same scheme with the
Walkouts.
actual administration building incorporated, and using and developing that corner.
So maybe 3 was the one I liked better now that I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I think 3 is my favorite. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna throw, I like 3 too because it had more housing units. 4, I kind of get where you're going, but then we went back like 200 units. So yeah, just thinking about the growth in this area.
Four was it's something that I was trying to make 1 work better. It's kind of what it amounted, and it's all right, but 3, I think of these 4 options, 3 is the best one.
The entire site is an enterprise zone too.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Thank you. Councilmember Holman?
Yeah, 3 was gonna be my favorite one too. I also like the idea of, doesn't maybe have to be mandated, but we'd be able to maybe encourage or require potentially if that's what people wanted, but for the area, the new things that are built to architecturally and design-wise complement the
Like a
historic look of it and not be a bunch
Yeah.
of modern stuff
Yeah.
placed in a historic
Yeah.
area. So I think that'd be pretty neat to do that. But yeah, I love all the elements of it. The historic preservation I think is real important. And that people, when they visit this area or if they live in it, that they understand the history of what this property's been used for and the things that have happened there.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think this one has the highest residential unit count too. So
By the way, this dotted in here is the existing current administration building, so that fits in that footprint too.
Oh,
yeah, so I think this is the one I would definitely like to see us have a goal of anyway, at least a dream. So yeah, I like all of it, and the facing Robinson, not having any dead spaces or no visible parking lots from any of the streets as you're driving by the district. I think that's a good thing, and yeah, I think there's just a lot of opportunity to add a lot of housing that we need without developing more greenfield and just complementing a major piece of our city's history like this.
This question might be more for Jane. I was kind of curious, we have Center City and form-based code. What if we wanted to have something that kind of outlined, like this is, it will be developed and it'll look like the historic buildings around it and this is what you can build where.
So I guess I would also kind of look to Rick on this too, but, essentially, we have the ARB, the design standards for the University of North Park. And then, like you said, Center City, us not being owners, but maybe creating an overlay. Is that something that we could do as a goal for the city as future growth? I don't know, you're looking at me like,
Yeah, it will be helpful if we were the owners. It
Right.
will also be helpful, obviously, the TIF concept does give you a little bit more control with regard
Right.
to how property develops in terms of your, what we call those things?
the design standards or
The design standards, the underlying agreement with regard to how the property is to be developed.
If you put a PUD on it and you could lock it in pretty darn tightly.
Right, as property owner, you could definitely come in and do a PUD and you could have your own design guidelines within that PUD. You could have an ARB that could review each application. That's what we do right now still with University of North Park. When an item comes through, the ARB still reviews those and sends us the approval that they've met the standards of the test of the design guidelines that were adopted within that PUD.
We did talk to the department about the concept of, let us help you sort of make this as good a project as you can, and it would be helpful to have the zoning in place before they sold it. They would have to be the applicant, and the question becomes, who's gonna pay the cost of the engineering to draw that plan / plat? So those are some of the hurdles. And as we're talking about, it would be helpful to sell it as not to parse it out individually, but to sell it as an entire unit. And then you could put the zoning on it, whatever the owner was, and then you could go forward with regard to, you did a TIF, you'd have a development agreement that would outline all those factors.
Is the state still interested in being an applicant on the TIF?
Yes, and we're waiting for additional feedback. What we'd love is just give me a number to buy the whole thing. We can use tax increment financing for real property acquisition, which would be really not the largest piece of the puzzle. And then the property is council's for council to implement the plan as you see fit. And I mean, it's apparent your plans are kind of coming together with a pretty accurate consensus of what should be. With this type of planning document, the attorneys at the Center for Economic Development Law could probably get you an even more accurate TIF revenue estimate for those elements. If you're the owner, the ability to work with DEQ on the asbestos mitigation, it's something they can help us with. They can't help another state agency with. Demolition costs, et cetera. You know, that's a lot of sewer infrastructure and a lot of water infrastructure that TIF dollars can absolutely make happen. So if we could just get a dollar figure.
Let's say we at a future BACA meeting, could we discuss that, Catherine?
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, just depending on the more fine-tuned council achieves in their consensus, the more accurate number I think they'll be able to calculate for you. It's that future TIF revenue is it's financeable to bring cash up front, because we'd love to think Mr. Francisco could reach into the secret vault under his desk and pull out enough to make that happen, but yeah, we probably require some financing. But with a picture like that, I think we could finance that from a cash flow perspective.
I think so too.
Councilmember Yee?
I was
There's a
gonna,
lot of value, I mean, it is a big project.
were we working off a survey at all with this?
We're working off, planning level that,
Okay.
like GIS based, contours.
We don't know if there's any like pipeline easements or anything like that.
We have no idea, yeah.
I was wondering if the sunks was maybe an old storage tank that got removed and that was
Yeah,
it.
we thought, when we see a feature like that, it feels to me like it's demolition debris
Yep, same.
that's in there, so don't build on it.
That's exactly what I was wondering. That's why I was asking. Yeah, so geotech and a survey, first order.
Yeah,
Maybe
when
environmental.
you don't know, be safe.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
with you.
yeah.
And that could also be a cattle pond, just a Texas tank.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
so, but either way, let's not dig
You wanna
it.
get a phase one, you wanna get a geotech and a survey. I mean,
It's a great pattern for kids to play in. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've got some parks that are like that. Trey Bates's dad's park, whatever that is.
Oh, yeah, Russell Bates Park.
Russell Bates Park. And, things like that. Anyway, we've got about 2 minutes left for questions. Yes, ma'am?
Can I just ask, do you wanna send comments? So we can get Brenda the PowerPoint and send that out to you, and if you guys wanna send comments back to me, then I can send them on.
I also think it would be helpful if we have time to do another one of those little working sessions. Small groups, council members, just kind of hash out some ideas and work through things, because I worry, I get my list out, Helen gets her list out, sorry, Councilmember Grant gets her list out, and we're just not coordinating. It's a lot of duplicated efforts. So if we could have an open dialogue, I think that'd be helpful.
That'd be good.
March, probably. Okay, we'll send out a doodle poll to see what everybody's availability is. Okay.
Good, thank you.
Anything else?